Gnarina was inspired by the Northern Lights and the idea of knitting our memories into our projects. So I hope that Gnarina's been an enjoyable project for you. She's got a few unconventional features for gnomes, and so we're going to go through how to finish that off. So the first thing to do is to find your center front. Usually I start by finding my back. The center front of Gnarina will have a triangle here lined up with a triangle here. We've got a shawl, a nose, a shawl ring, 2 arms, and some knitting needles that need to be attached to our unfinished project and to Gnarina's hands as well. So let's get going. We're going to start with the nose, starting from things that are centered and are pivotal to the personality. It's always a great way to kind of like base everything else around that. So we're going to have our nose, and we're going to flip up our brim. I've lightly stuffed the nose, but not overstuffed it. I want it to be full enough that it has its own body, but not so full that it's going to be coming down to the bottom here and making it hard for us to sew. Also, when stuffing, if you ever distort the stitch profile, you've gone too far. So if you ever notice that the stitches are stretching, that's a sign that you've stuffed too much. You can stuff quite firmly without overstuffing. It's a bit of an art and not a science, and there is a really helpful video linked in the project as well about stuffing gnomes. So we're going to use the whip stitch. We're going to make sure we're centered. So we've got our triangle right here. I like to whip stitch where I'm holding with one thumb, making sure it's centered where I need to center it, and that I've got just one row of fabric exposed. I'm going to go through both layers of the circle of the nose and then go through the first layer of stitches on the body. So that first set of V's below the pickup from the brim. So I'm always going to go through those 3 layers. 1, 2 in the nose, and then 1 in the body. We like to keep our gnome noses really high up so that the brim can drape over them. It is a really charming part of the sort of Scandinavian Nordic nose or gnome design is the lack of eyes and the cute droopiness of the hat and nose interaction. And so having the nose nice and high up is the way to do this. All right, so I've gone across in whip stitch. Now I can have a moment, kind of puff it up. I always flatten it out by doing this. Have a moment, see how it feels, if it's going to be a decoration. And I assume that she is going to be a decoration for everyone, since the unfinished knitting side of this would make it difficult for her to be a toy. You don't need to do a whole lot of securing if it's not going to be a toy. So now I'm just going to, if you are planning some toy things with her, you're going to want to go and maybe whip stitch along the bottom again on the other direction. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back down into the fabric so that I'm not coming up here in the fabric of the body itself. Then I'm going to go over here so that my gray yarn is with my gray yarn. And I'm going to make a knot. I'm going to go under a stitch with a leg of a stitch here. If I go through that loop twice, once, twice, and then just scooch it all the way down as close as I can, and then push the needle through, either into the body or up back through the nose. That end will live inside the stuffing, and we don't have to worry ever again about that end coming out. All right, so there we go. Now, when placing your arms, you may wish to first take a moment and play with the shawl. So maybe watch the shawl design section or the shawl assembly portion before you just follow along what I'm doing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the arms in line with not the midway section. And because she doesn't have a beard, we don't have the beard to align ourselves with. But we want the arms to be about like this. So just a little bit set from the nose, but not so far that we're either at halfway or sitting back on the body. We want them to sit on the front third of the body, let's say. You can maybe check to see if you are lining up. I'm lining up with 3 purl stitches here. So then on this side, I'll want to line up with these 3 purl stitches there. So remember that when you flip up the brim, the purl stitches will now become knit stitches because, of course, we're looking at the reverse side of our ribbing. So here are my 3 knit stitches now. I'm going to go through a stitch, so under 2 legs of the body fabric, and just pull and tighten that up. And then I'm going to go through a couple times in this direction and then a couple times in this direction. And I'm kind of pointing that out now because navy yarn on navy body, it's just going to make it a little hard to see what I'm doing. So I go straight through the arm and then I go under the body, straight through the arm and under the body. Then we can do that in the other direction. While I'm thinking of it, one thing you may want to do with your arms, depending on how how posable you would like your gnome to be, is you can insert wire down the arm before you attach it, or even after you attach it if you have regret later that you didn't. And you can just insert the wire down the center. A lot of people like florist's wire. Florist's wire has that tape on it that makes it a little grabby and sometimes can make it hard to insert up the arm, but that is something you can do if you are thinking about making your arms a little more posable. All right, so you can tie a knot if you'd like. Because mine is just going to be a decoration, I'm actually not going to knot mine. I am just going to push through. Did I say mine's not going to be a decoration? Because mine is not going to be a toy, I'm going to not knot. I'm just going to bury that end. All right, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so the shawl attachment's actually one of the easiest things we're going to do because we're not actually going to sew it on. You can, if you'd like, you'll need a new length of yarn, but here's what we're going to do. We need our shawl ring and our shawl. So we're going to put the shawl on the back here. Don't want to get cold while we're knitting. All right, so I've got it lined up, centered there, and I can tell it's centered because my ends here are the same length. So then holding these ends together, I'm going to take my shawl ring, and there's a slightly nubbier bit where I sewed it together there, so I'm just going to make sure that that goes to the back. So I'm going to pull this up this way, and you can go as tight as you want. But you probably want to go reasonably tight. And then we need these ends to look nice and tidy, but also not to be in the way of our knitting. So she's got this very cool idea she had with her shawl ring that she actually, make sure this is folded the way I want it to be so that the lacier side is out. We can tuck the ends of our shawl back up into our shawl ring. And then it's going to form almost this really sweet little, it forms a sweet little bow shape at the bottom here. So let's make sure I've got one end and now the other end. So they're both coming through and up this shawl. And now what I would suggest is get everything finished, enjoy the process of this, and then once you know you like this, you may want to tack that down with a little bit of yarn or some fabric glue or something like that. But do give it a moment or two to sort of like settle into itself, especially once you've got the knitting needle thing going on, and then lock it in place. So come back in a bit and lock it in place. So the knitting needles, this is the part where things get a little interesting, and you're going to have several choices. So let's talk about our choices. So we've got our hat down to basically I-cord at this point, and she's very close to finish. She's been working very hard ever since her trip to the Arctic. And you have to sort of decide, do you want to show her partway through a row? Do you want to show her almost done a row or starting a row? Because of course we know that depending on what is happening in the knitting, more or fewer stitches will be on the left or right needles. The odds are this is a slightly bigger needle than you used to knit this. So one option you have is to simply go and pick the stitches up off the scrap yarn using another needle. So I'm actually using my embroidery needle here. So let's get rid of that scrap yarn. We're going to have our hat coming up and around. And once you've got it all arranged, you may even want to just sort of play with things, open things up and steam it so that the hat lays a certain way in the front here. That'll kind of come in as we go. So we are going to, I'm going to go through this hand first. And again, there's multiple options for how you want to do this. So we could just jam it through the hand and through the stitches. All right, so that would look like this, and that's pretty straightforward. Another option is to skim the back of the hand. So rather than just stabbing through, we would sort of go through one stitch here and then come up here, and then it will look a little bit more like she's grabbing it. So that's a slightly more polished look. The nice thing about this option is that it's quite secure and you don't need to do a lot to make it look like she's actually knitting. The second needle I find a little harder to position, and you may need to play around with this a little bit. So I'm going to do the same sort of thing where I'm going to go into the hand and come up a little bit forwards of that. And now, that didn't quite work. It kind of bent her hand a little bit. Maybe a bit more like that. So now we have to figure out how we want her to look. Do we want her hand to be under? That's not looking good to me. What if we just went through between two stitches here, almost like she might be ready to do a decrease because, you know, the hat's almost done. And this is where the artistry of finishing off a gnome kind of comes into play. So all right, I've been fiddling around and fiddling around, trying to make things the best that I can, and I found that if my needle had been over her elbow sort of before, but I tucked it under and down like this, and now everything sits really nicely. One of the nice things about the needles and her hands kind of all crisscrossing right at this point is it really brings focus to what's happening here against this dark fabric. So you're going to want to think about, you're going to want to let it sit. You might want to steam this, as I mentioned, so that it lays a certain way on the front of the body. And then you've also got this end to deal with. I'm going to suggest that what you do is simply thread it back through the hat, almost like you're tying it off. And then I'm also going to suggest that once you know that you like what's going on with your hands and the needles, that you just touch a little dab of glue where it's not visible, but you might want to just, you know, a little dab of glue right here in the wood and then move it forward so you can't see. Crazy glue, obviously better because it will go a little faster than, say, like a wood glue or a school glue, kind of a white glue situation. But a little glue there. You could also put a little bit of glue here and then slide her hand back up. The same thing for here, a little glue and then slide her hand back up, so that once you've just got things set, you can have a sort of a decided finished look. So like I said, I'm going to take this end and I'm just going to weave it back down. Those of you who love modifying gnomes, you may want to put a little pocket on over here and have a little bit of yarn coming over here and sitting in the pocket. That's definitely something I thought about when I was designing, but I thought we already had so much going on. I wasn't sure if I wanted to add that a little bit more, although now that I look at it, I'm really tempted to add it. So I'm just going to slide this. Hang on here, let's get under this way. It would have been a lot easier if I would have made that decision before I started doing all that, wouldn't it? All right, and I'm just going to go down as far as I can into the hat without the needle popping out into the front of the fabric, because we don't want the, we don't want to be making stitching, we can see. All right, so let's get rid of that. There we go. Who knows, maybe she's just binding off and is almost done her hat. Like I said, she might need a little bit of zhuzhing and finishing to get her perfect at the end, but this is the process that you will go through while you make your decisions about how you'd like yours to look. Play around, and like I said, once you like what you have, you can tack things down. You might want to tack her arms down, sort of grab some extra black thread or some extra navy thread, bring it from the back or from the brim, and then just sort of tack it down at the elbows maybe. You can tack the hat down and just make it sort of permanently the way you like. because this is such a special action-filled shot that you maybe want to get the action just right. But again, that's a preference thing. You do you and gnome the way you want to gnome.